Welcome everyone to Alpine University's June webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really glad that you chose to join us. Our topic this afternoon is all about health checks. My name is Jana Hairston and I'll be serving as your moderator today. I work here on the marketing team at Alpine. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes, but wanted to make a couple of announcements first. If you find value in attending today's webinar, make sure to register for our next webinar that will be held in August. Make sure to watch your email for invitation and registration links. If you're having technical problems with today's webinar, please close down and restart the webinar. If it doesn't work for you, please call GoToWebinar support, and in just a minute, I will chat that into the chat box. We will allow plenty of questions at the end for plenty of time, forgive me, for questions at the end of our presentation today. So if you do have questions, feel free to use the raise your hand feature or chat them in the chat box, and I can unmute you or I will verbally read your question for you. Last but not least, we're going to cover a lot of information today, but don't worry because we're recording the session. So if you miss something, you can always go back and review it once we email the link and the download out to you. We post it on our website generally the same afternoon, and we send out a link hopefully by tomorrow afternoon for you to reference. So without further ado, our presenter today is Dr. Lisa O'Leary, Senior Psychometrician here at Alpine on our IT credentialing team. And Lisa, take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Jana. As Jana mentioned, I'm Lisa O'Leary. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about health checks today as part of the Alpine University curriculum and ongoing webinars that we've been running each month here at Alpine. So to start off with, just thinking about health checks, let's kind of start globally with what are the components of a good test. A good test really needs to be constantly focused on that validity argument and the evidence of your validity statements that you're trying to make about your exam. So essentially what we're trying to come up with is sufficient evidence that supports the particular use of a set of test results for a particular purpose. This evidence should be collected throughout various phases of exam development. Today in particular, we're going to be talking about the exam maintenance phase of development, in particular the use of health checks to help add to that validity argument. As a component of that validity argument, we're constantly trying to make sure that not only are we consistently and precisely measuring the domain of interest, but we're also constantly needing to be focused on the level of fairness that's being introduced in the exams. When we're thinking about exam maintenance and health checks in particular, the main element of fairness that will come into most exams, unless you're running something like a differential person functioning or a differential item functioning, if you have, let's say, translated exams, would be the relative performance of perhaps multiple parallel forms that you have out in the field at one time. Essentially keeping a close eye on those reliability characteristics and those fairness indicators will help provide information to support our validity arguments over the life and the duration of an exam. So in terms of the exam development cycle, what I've presented to you here is a validity framework through which Alpine really works to develop all of the exams that we're involved in here and then also continue through the cycle up through exam maintenance. Where you can see that we are in the cycle is up around 11 o'clock on a typical clock, indicating that while exam maintenance does come at the very tail end of the full development cycle, it is a critical piece of the pie in order to continue to make those validity statements with regards to your exam. It's also quite critical when we think about the amount of time, effort, and resources, both human and physical, that go into developing our exams, that they remain relevant, consistent, and appropriate over time. So translating that now into the exam release cycle, again, just level setting somewhat to kind of keep an eye on where we are in the cycle and what we'll be talking about here today. Health checks occur at the end of the exam release cycle. So ideally, the exam program, the exam would have already gone through some type of a beta testing situation, perhaps an alpha and a beta test, depending on the type of exam that you're running and the various components of it, types of items, number of forms, that sort of a thing. We will have already gone through beta item selection, which is essentially containing all of the same item and form level statistics as the health checks do, with health checks just having the added benefit of being able to present some information with regards to empirical pass rate. We will have already gone through an operational forms assembly process where we're targeting a certain number of items, perhaps a certain number of types per form. Of course, we would want that to be representative to our blueprint specifications. And we would, again, want to make sure that we're balancing any multiple parallel forms with regards to not only difficulty, but anticipated length of time, reliability, standard deviation, those types of things. We will have already gone through the standard setting process, either immediately before or immediately preceding that forms assembly process. So we will have a live cut score on the forms. Essentially, we're running these item and form level analyses, also known as a health check in this case, to really take a gauge and a temperature on, quite frankly, the health of the exam and what's happening with perhaps items and multiple forms that you may have in the field at once. One of the first important decisions that an exam program needs to make when considering exam maintenance and health checks in particular is what is appropriate in terms of when to conduct health checks and how many, let's say in an annual cycle, you would need to perform. There's a couple different factors that you're going to want to take into consideration when beginning to think about this, namely three various areas. First being candidate volumes. Depending on your candidate volumes, you have very differing needs when it comes to exam maintenance and health checks. Again, you would want to keep in mind not only your overall target audience size, but what is the size of that sample that you're looking to get? What is the anticipated number of candidates that you're going to have fit for your exams? What is the anticipated number of candidates that you feel will retake your exam? And what is that retake cycle, and how does that align with your exam maintenance cycle? Very important to have those kind of keyed into each other. Also, how representative are those candidates that you've been getting to your exam? And what kind of influence will that have on potential results and when you want to run your health check? With regards to the candidate volumes, a couple key pieces to keep in mind. For exams that may be coming immediately after beta that has smaller candidate volumes coming out of the beta sample, so let's say somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 candidates total per form, it may be important to run a health check as soon as possible, perhaps maybe when we hit 250 live candidates, to make sure that the statistics that were generated on that smaller sample coming out of beta are really stable and the best indicators for how, let's say, multiple forms are. Also, it's good to get a gauge on how that cut score may be performing early on in the life cycle of your operational form. Conversely, if you have very high volume exams, if you have large samples and very large populations, it may be important to do more routine maintenance as exposure and security concerns become more and more of an issue, either with candidate pre-knowledge or, again, the coordination of your retake policies with your number of forms, with your exam maintenance cycle, hoping to ensure that a candidate would not sit and retake essentially the same exam that they had already been judged against once before. Up on the screen here I have just a very rough kind of indicator scale in terms of low to very high volumes and what you might want to consider in terms of the number of health checks that you run per year, ranging from perhaps annually to monthly. It would also be appropriate in terms of volumes if you just wanted to think about it in terms of a routine cycle. So let's say you just had it in your plan that you were going to run a health check every quarter, then you would just know that it happens regardless of candidate volume. In addition to candidate volumes, you're also going to want to think about to what extent is your domain changing? Are you in a rapidly changing content domain where the speededness of the changes really need to be stayed on top of in order to maintain the relevancy of your content and the appropriateness of the exam to measure the domain over time. And finally, in terms of deciding when and how many health checks to conduct, let's say on an annual basis, you're also going to want to keep in mind any exposure or other security concerns that you would hopefully have been putting into a security plan prior to operational release of your forms. Why would it be important to conduct health checks? What's the benefit of going through this part of the exam maintenance cycle? It's a really great gauge to evaluate statistical data regarding not only form performance, but also item level performance during operational administration. Again, going back to that validity wheel, hopefully exam programs will have gone through all of the diligent pieces that they need to go through in terms of really compiling statistically relevant and content-based exams. In some cases, though, once we go to the operational delivery setting, something may change, something may happen, something may be working just as we didn't expect it to be. Health checks are a great way to kind of key into that. Again, we're looking to provide evidence for those validity arguments across a host of different elements of the program. So are we adhering to the defined purpose of the exam once we go operational? What is the quality of the psychometric and statistical attributes of the exam and the exam forms once it goes live? How appropriate were your standard setting results? Let's say you were to conduct something like a modified Angoff with a Hofsky in conjunction. How closely are we hitting the targets that your subject matter experts indicated would be the likelihood that the MQC would score in the exam? Where's our empirical pass rate compared to, let's say, Hofsky predictions in terms of what a minimal and maximum expected pass rate would be? And if that differs, can we point to a reason why? Has there been a security breach? Has our beta population proven to be at a much higher or lower level than our target audience was, and has that impacted our standard setting results and the actual operation of that cut score? Again, keeping a constant eye on exposure and security review. An evaluation of fairness. Again, this can mean differing things depending on kind of the elements of your exam program, one of which being, again, the parallel nature between perhaps multiple forms that are out in the field at once, wanting to always make that claim that regardless of form or the particular sample of items that a candidate might have gotten on a given day, that their pass-fail decision, if you're in a pass-fail situation, would essentially remain consistent over their multiple administrations of the exam. Again, alignment with policy and administrative goals. Perhaps we're interested in a maximum seat time. We need to ensure that candidates aren't having speededness introduced into the exam based on that seat time, etc. might be exposed through a health check process. And then you can make some really informed decisions with regards to exams, forms, and items going forward. Again, helping with the strategic planning, not assumptions of what's happening with your exam, but actually working from data to make those informed decisions going forward. Again, health checks provide evidence of the overall health of the exam and its items. A couple key indicators that they include. One being use. They help to track exam volumes and pass rates over time. Also performance. Again, ensuring that the forms and items are functioning as intended in your operational environment, regardless of the delivery channel or mode that you may be using. Exposure, tracking both item and form level exposure to address any security concerns. Perhaps you're interested in a particular bank of items that you're worried has gotten exposed. Perhaps you're interested in a particular collection of candidates that maybe came to the same test center on the same day. Health check will help you pinpoint any of those issues and perhaps make more strategic decisions around any enforcement areas that you may want to go down over time. So kicking it off, again, health check is really a combination of differing types of item and form level analyses. Here at Alpine, we actually use a combination on our psychometrically driven health checks that are a combination of classical test theory and item response theory. I'll go through those at very high levels to give you guys a sense of the types of statistics that could be included on item and form level analyses, again, depending on who your vendor is. We're coming from an Alpine perspective for the purposes of this webinar. But essentially, item level analyses should really be diagnosing potential item issues. And these types of item issues could be coming across in a variety of the item characteristics. So it could be highlighting issues with the item wording. Perhaps it's a double-barreled stem. Perhaps you have an underutilized distractor. Perhaps you have a distractor where when put in the operational testing, has been interpreted in a way that could be correct, however, is not being keyed as such. That leads into potential issues with scoring. Again, are there any miskeys? Do we have any issues with our option analyses? If, let's say, you're administering more complicated item types to something other than a straight selected response multiple choice type item, are there any issues with your scoring logic? If, let's say, you have polynomous or multi-point dichotomous, points worth more than one item. Is your points possible being calculated correctly? Again, if you have those multi-point type items included on your exam, are there any operational issues with how total points are being calculated? And then what's the relationship between particular items and the entire test? Is our collection of items statistically pointing towards measurement of a singular unidimensional domain, or do we have particular items that aren't operating as planned and may actually be detracting from our ability to make accurate pass-fail decisions for our candidates, certainly not adding to our validity argument at that point. And these item-level analyses should enable a selection of the final items viable for operational forms reassembly, perhaps during an item banking situation. So this would also be indicative of those items that you would want to retain as viable, perhaps acceptable but unused, to be seeded in later if you're hoping to maximize the number of operational forms you have in the field at once. So I'm not going to read all of these individual statistics. Jana can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the slides will be made available after this. So if you guys just really want to have a statistical moment and get down into the weeds with everything, have at it. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the session as well. When we're thinking about item difficulty, p-value is a really great basic statistic to start looking at item level analyses on health checks. Essentially, this is telling us the proportion of candidates who answer an item correctly. Your ranges are going to be from 0 to 1 or 0% to 100%. High values are indicative of easier items, a high proportion of candidates scoring them, answering them correctly. Lower values indicative of, sorry, I have a typo on this, I should say harder items. Higher values indicate more difficult. Average item score is essentially the way that you measure what your p-value would be, but in this case for items that have a max point higher than 1. So these would be your multi-point dichotomous and or your polynomous items. Essentially, it's just telling you your mean score that candidates got out of the base number of possible points. So let's say you had, using this item 1.1.1.3, let's say that it had 8 points possible and your average score was 5.833. If it's easier for you to kind of compute that in your head and think about it constantly in terms of p-values, if you took the average item score, divided it by max points possible, that's essentially a corollary to what the quote-unquote proportion correct on the item would be. So moving from classical into item response theory, here at Alpine we tend to use the Rush model in terms of our secondary modeling approach. However, we will run other models depending on the type of exam if and when appropriate. Essentially, the Rush scale places both items and candidate performance on a singular scale. So you can actually compare the probability that a candidate would receive a certain score on an item in particular, taking into consideration the actual difficulty of the items. It's based on an artificial scale, typically something in the range of -4 to 4, item difficulty typically centered around 0. What this means is for Rush item difficulty measures, you're likely going to see some numbers with negatives in front of them. Those lower values indicate easier items. Higher values indicate more difficult items. Item score correlation, also known as a point biserial. Again, point biserial would be the specific instance where we have just 0, 1, correct, incorrect, dichotomous type items. Essentially, this is driven by estimating performance on the item in relationship to performance on the exam overall. The range is -1 to 1. What we're hopefully looking for in terms of your item analyses would be strong positive correlation for your items. What essentially this would mean that a candidate that scores this answer correctly does well on the exam. Vice versa, a candidate who scores poorly overall on the item scores poorly overall on the exam. Where we run into issues is when we run into things with kind of low positive or negative correlation, which are indicative of there being some type of issue going on with the items. That could be multifold in terms of what the issue is, and that's where those option analyses are going to really come into handy to start diving into what's driving this low or negative correlation. Essentially, a negative correlation would mean that scoring well on the item actually correlates with doing poorly on the exam. Again, clearly not the direction, the inverse relationship of what we would be hoping for in terms of items positively contributing to a quote-unquote correct decision for various candidates. Item reliability, in the case of Alpine health checks, is a measure of internal consistency. It's the degree to which an item is contributing to and measuring the content in the same way as the test overall. Again, just like with item score correlation, we'd be looking for high positive values. Essentially, that's indicative of a strong relationship between the item, what the item is measuring, and the overall test. We would hopefully not have any negative values emerge. But in the case that we do, again, that's indicative of an item actually negatively detracting from your ability to consistently measure a candidate's knowledge, skills, and abilities on the exam. Item response time typically is median based on the distribution, not average, not a mean average. So this is the median amount of time candidates spend on an item on Alpine health checks, typically presented in number of seconds. Short amount of time means candidates are responding to the item quite quickly. Long amount of time means that it's taking candidates a longer time to complete that item. In most cases, it would be expected that there would be an inverse relationship with p-value, such that easy items should have a short average time and hard items perhaps might have a longer average time. If you're in a situation where you have items with more than 1 point, it's also a typical trend that those items, again, that present in a more complicated manner or require higher levels of cognitive complexity would, of course, take longer to complete than perhaps a more rote recall multiple choice type item. One of the key factors that's presented on a health check will be any item flags. And essentially, these flags can be customizable for whatever is most appropriate for your exam program, the purpose of the test, the information that you're trying to kind of pull out of your health check. Again, there's those multiple reasons that you may be interested in conducting a health check, and the flags should inherently reflect the type of information that you're trying to pull out of it. The flags are showing those items that have some type of issue based solely on their statistical performance, and I make that point intentionally for a discussion that we're going to get into here in a little bit. Standard Alpine flagging parameters are based on p-values for the difficulty of items. Any item with a 0.9, 90% of candidates or higher scoring the item correctly would be flagged as too easy. Anything with a p-value less than 0.1 would be demonstrated as too hard. But again, completely customizable, completely appropriate to change that based on the level of information that you're looking to get out of your health check. Item score correlation flags. Items with the correlation less than the critical correlation would be flagged for having no correlation, and that critical correlation is a statistical formula based not only on the performance of the item, but also on the number of responses that you have. Lower your sample size, the higher your correlation needs to go, the less stable your statistics are. Items with a negative correlation that's beyond a 1 standard deviation from the critical correlation will be flagged as negative. Under the ATS comments, that's another way of interpreting, is there an issue with the option analysis? We're going to show you that option analysis here in 1 minute. But essentially, either the number or the letter that's shown is indicative of some type of issue with the distractor that's being presented. So in this case, a 4 could also be interpreted as a D, depending on the scoring mechanism that your delivery channel uses. And it's likely showing that there's some type of an issue with that distractor in particular. Perhaps it's a high correlation, perhaps it's a high p-value, perhaps there's more high-scoring candidates selecting that option than the actual correct option. Item decisions. When a health check first gets provided from your psychometric support team, these are going to be recommended decisions. Again, recommended item status coming out of the health check based solely, in most cases, on the statistics. These recommendations should be reviewed in conjunction with subject matter experts if and whenever possible. It's helpful to contextualize them with any candidate comments that might be provided either at the item or the exam level. It's helpful to have those teams evaluate, are there too easy or too hard items that should still be retained, because although they're not statistically performing, let's say, in a range of most interest, there may be something content-based within those items that's really critical to be included on the exam, and you certainly wouldn't want to eliminate that solely based on the difficulty of the item. Again, we would want to look at those items with the correlational issues, if there are any, to kind of identify, drill down into, let's say there's a potential miskey, or in that previous example where it looked like 4/D was being chosen a lot by candidates. Is it truly just a good distractor? Subject matter experts would be able to help you figure that out. So it's really doing its job in terms of dissuading some high-scoring candidates. Or, contrastly, is there actually something in that distractor that could be scored correctly, and we need to update the key to include those types of options? Those are the types of decisions. If there's anything structural that was recommended from those subject matter experts in the item review prior to making final keep-delete decisions, Alpine's recommendation would be that you would reseed those as pilot items prior to being included in an operational form to collect some more valid statistics around how the item is actually performing, rather than going with the misaligned data that would have come out of the current health check based on perhaps a faulty operating item. So that brings us to the option analyses. The option analyses provide the breakdown of how well each response is performing as either the correct answer or perhaps multiple correct answers if you're in a multiple response, multiple choice type of an item, or incorrect, the distractor. Again, they're going to highlight any distractors that have higher proportion of candidates selecting them, higher p-values than the key. Any distractors with high positive correlations, particularly if it's higher, again, than the key. And any frequency count, where you have a large number of high-scoring candidates selecting that option. So if we use this item 2.3.5 as an example, it's a select 2 type option choice. You can see the various options going down, the various p-values associated with those options. Again, proportion of candidates that were actually selecting them. BD that has the caret next to it, in this case would be the correct answer. In this case, BC would have been that option flag, because you can see across our quartile, so 25 up to 100, the number of candidates that scored within that range, you can see that we have 17 candidates in those upper 2 quartiles that were actually selecting BC. That's where that high correlation is coming from for that distractor in and of itself. You can also see that the correct distractor, we have a large number of low-scoring candidates in the range of 25 to 48, 49 to 60, 61 to 79 that are selecting that and getting it correct. Again, is there something in that option that the higher performing candidates are seeing that those lower performing candidates, it's just not clear to them? They're going with perhaps the correct key. In this case, is it possible that BC is also a correct key? Again, not going to read this to you guys verbatim, but just some examples of kind of interpretations you can make from item level option analyses and overall item level statistics. What the situation is, types of statistics that may be pointing towards those, and then some remediations or recommendations based out of that. So just using, let's say, a very easy item as the example, a way that you may be able to tell that from your health check, perhaps it has a high p-value, perhaps it has a low negative Bosch measure, perhaps it has a lower correlation or reliability. Recommendations. Let's say the item concept is too easy for your target population. The way that the item was worded is just too easy. We can delete that item and just not include it as a viable item going forward. If the concept is fundamentally too easy, there's just something in the wording that's giving it away. That's an area when you're talking with your subject matter experts that you could always revise the item stem, perhaps eliminate a key, a clue that's in it, and then you could repilot, reseed that item as unscored on your next operational set of forms. So moving from item level analyses into your form level analyses, which is the other major set of statistical data that's going to be presented on a health check. These show the test level statistics by form. Differences in difficulty, differences in pass rates, differences in time would be indicative of non-equivalence, again, between perhaps multiple parallel forms that you have in the field at once. Bringing us all the way back to the components of a good test, this starts to get into fairness issues. Because what this is showing us, perhaps if we are seeing those differences, is that depending on if a person gets Form A or Form B randomly assigned to them when they sit down at testing center X, they may or may not have a higher likelihood of passing the exam if those forms are equivalent with difficulty, with time, with reliability. A few key statistics I want to point out in terms of overall exam performance. Your mean is going to be your average exam score for all examinees. It's a gauge of the overall form level difficulty, the overall exam level difficulty for candidates. Your standard deviation is going to be your variability in exam scores. So higher values here indicate scores vary greatly from the mean, while lower values indicate scores are more closely clustered around the mean. Helps to give you a sense in conjunction with your score distribution graph, let's say, of how your overall population is performing. Is everyone performing very similarly? Are we really able to kind of pull apart a spectrum of the candidates based on the items that ended up on the final form or forms? Total test time. Again, median amount of time candidates take on the entire exam, contrasted with what we showed before, which was that item response time, which is the median response time for each particular item. Any exams that have a short average time and high levels of performance might be a good candidate for further evaluation. Again, these could be indicators of a security issue. It could also just be an indication that perhaps you have an easy exam that isn't very challenging to your candidate. Nothing wrong with that if, let's say, the purpose of your exam is an entry-level gateway exam to higher levels of cognitive complexity in terms of exams and types of domains that are being measured down the line in your certification program. And your alpha reliability is really important to look at. This is the consistency of the items of the entire exam, how well the items of the test seem to be measuring the same amount of knowledge, how consistently a person would be scoring over time. At Alpine, our baseline threshold that we use for operational exams is 0.85. There's research done on various spectrums that would be considered, but that 0.85 is a pretty good baseline target for what you would be hoping to achieve on your operational forms. Your health checks will also provide pass rates. So these help to contextualize how the cut score is functioning. So again, let's say you have your 60 items. Let's just say this is a dichotomous exam. From here, let's say your cut is somewhere around 48. We can tell we're going to have around 80% pass rates for both Form A and Form B. Again, showing relative equivalence of the forms across the ability spectrum. This also helps to highlight any kind of blips on the radar. If there's a certain score where all of a sudden a bunch of candidates are scoring it, do you have a lot of candidates that aren't scoring anywhere in the low end of the spectrum? So for example, on this exam, we didn't have a candidate score under, it looks like, maybe 29 or 30. Is that an issue that you need to be concerned about? Why are so many candidates scoring so highly out of the 60 items? Overall test time, indicative of perhaps some fairness issues and security. When you're looking at your total time distributions, what you're interested in looking at here is there a high proportion of candidates using the maximum amount of time? Are we introducing a construct, a relevant variable of speediness into our exams, perhaps unintentionally? Essentially, the marks that we use here at Alpine would be what is the time limit that 95% of your candidates would be able to complete the exam in its entirety. Is there something on your graph that's showing you that there's kind of a wall candidates are running up against? And if there is there something unique about those candidates? Are they non-native English speakers? Does it make sense to have an accommodation for those folks? That's the type of information that you'll be able to pull out of a total time distribution graph. Again, you'll also be able to note any differences between the forms. Is one form taking on average much longer than another? Are there certain kind of frequency blips? You know, if you see on Form B a group of individuals that are taking 10 minutes, is this something we need to be concerned about? Security, if we're looking at our exam time by exam score graph, are there clusters that we need to be worried about? We're looking at the upper left-hand quadrant. Are there candidates achieving super high scores too quickly? So really high scoring individuals in really short amounts of time. Are there candidates that seem to be taking on the other far right-hand side, that lower right-hand quadrant, a large amount of time on the exam but not doing very well? Is there a potential that they're harvesting items, that they're sitting on items trying to remember the content? Different types of suspect behavior you can start noticing in these form level analyses. If you decide to, you can also collect item level comments and or exam level comments, even on your operational forms. These candidate comments tend to be open-ended. On health checks, they can be combined with other data or not. So perhaps performance of the candidate to kind of figure out if this person is a valid contributor to the type of comments that you would want to be listening to or not. These, again, are super helpful when reviewed with your subject matter experts, particularly in light of the statistics that were provided. So it may be a case where there were statistics provided that were flagging a particular item. When the subject matter experts go in and review the comments, perhaps they're pointing towards a very simple fix on your item that you could make and then reseed it, repilot it. Vice versa, perhaps there's an item that hasn't been flagged statistically for some reason, but when you go in and review those candidate comments, there's actually something happening with the item, the performance of the item, that may not have come across statistically, but perhaps it's an important element or an issue with the item that your subject matter experts will be able to point out based upon this comment feedback. Again, moving towards the Rush model, test characteristic curves. Essentially, these are curves based on the underlying Rush model that relate examinee ability to raw exam score. The purpose of including these on the health check are multifold. They have to help with equating, they help with equivalence of forms. In terms of interpretation for kind of those of you who are running exam programs might receive a health check and just want to look at this quickly, the closer the lines are to one another, the better. That is a format of really viewing the coincidence of the forms. So if they're right on top of each other, great, your parallel forms across the ability spectrum are really performing in conjunction with one another. No fairness issues introduced based on the form that you're receiving. In this case, the PCCs are a little bit gappy, indicating that your forms are not of equal equivalence. Same level of information that I would expect kind of exam sponsors or program managers to take from your test information functions. Essentially, these show how much information is provided by each form, not only at your target cut score, but along your entire ability scale. Depending on the purpose of your exam, it may be that you develop more items right around the cut score because you're super interested in that particular decision. So you want to have a lot of items on your form that specifically pinpoint that level of ability of candidates. That would translate into more quote-unquote information on this graph. It's essentially showing the level of content directed at different levels of ability that you have on your exam. Again, you would hope to see coincidence in your test information functions for multiple parallel forms. It's also not uncommon to have a goal be for those certification exams that are making a single pass-fail decision that you would have several items on your exam that are targeting that. Again, you're not getting a lot of information on your candidates at your cut score if a lot of your items are at the low end of the scale or a lot of items are at the high end of the scale unless you have an extreme cut score for some reason, again, aligned with the intended uses and interpretations of your test scores. There should also be some blueprint information, blueprint tracking type information provided on a health check, which are essentially comparing blueprint specifications to those recommended keep-delete decisions and highlighting any disparities that you may have from your blueprint, perhaps your intended reassembly of your operational form based on the relative item performance that you have. Depending on your blueprint structure, the blueprint tracker can be run either in terms of items or points. Again, points would make more sense on an exam where you may have items for multiple points. And then again, by section level, domain level, and or objective level, functional group level, whatever the appropriate nomenclature is for the program that you work with. And in this example, we can see that we were working with a 60-item blueprint, and it's showing us at the section level that we have a disparity for that section, section number 1. The blueprint calls for 7 items. Based on the recommended count, there were only 5. In that case, you have a couple of options that will be presented to you. Do you want to proportionally reduce the number of items on the form such that we can include those 5 from section 1 at the section level? Do you want to review those keep-delete decisions? And again, perhaps there's some items that even though statistically they're recommended to be deleted, really warrant inclusion based on a content basis. On that conversation with subject matter experts, perhaps you could find 2 items that performed well enough or have another justification to be included on your form. Looking on the right-hand side now would be the objective level blueprint tracking. Again, you would be able to tell from this, for example, in 1.1, 1.02, and 2.02, there were not sufficient items recommended to be retained to reach that objective level forms assembly that you were hoping to. Again, in this case, you would have multiple options you could work through with whatever psychometrician you may be working with in terms of, okay, not ideal, but do we maybe want to balance our forms, build our forms to the section level rather than the objective level? Do we want to do that for the whole exam? Do we want to do that just for particular objectives? This will help you highlight those areas. The blueprint tracker is also great if we were to make some decisions from it to move forward with some targeted item writing, because it helps demonstrate those areas of your blueprint where your item bank might not be as strong based on your operational form. Again, if you're in an item pool or an item banking situation, this would be a great moment to perhaps pull out some of those older, acceptable, but unused items, equate them to the current scale, and include them on your operational forms assembly to help bolster the number of items that you have and your ability to meet your true desired blueprint. Likewise, it helps highlight those areas that you may want to develop additional items in. So let's say that you were in a quarterly maintenance, quarterly item writing cycle. You have SMEs getting together for a handful of days. You could only write to 3 sections. I would absolutely recommend that you write items to those sections that were highlighted to have blueprint shortages based on performance on your health check. Security checks. Inherently built into a lot of health check type information that's just there in your item and form level analyses. So several indicators of possible form exposure and candidate pre-knowledge. Talked about most of these already, so I'm not going to go into too far of depth, but the types of things that you would be looking for. Do you have a highly skewed score distribution, either to the left or the right? The left may be indicative of item candidate pre-knowledge, where a lot of candidates perhaps had access to the data beforehand, and you're only seeing highly scoring individuals. High incidence of high-scoring candidates in low amounts of time. Again, this exam time by exam score graph sadly is reality for a lot of IT programs in particular, where we know that there's a cluster of people that have access to that data are scoring, 90, 95, 100% on the exam in 20 minutes or less. And then looking at your moving average scores. Are there any blips on the radar? Any spikes or dips? Any upward trends or downward trends over time? That's where you can start getting into kind of your trend analysis and drill down into who was taking the exam on that day, where were they taking it, are there any issues that we really need to be concerned about at this point. That leads us nicely into your anomalous records. In this case, at the form level on a health check, it will provide some information about candidates that were identified for having potentially suspect behavior or exam performance. Again, we have some default flags here at Alpine. Of course, they're completely customizable to what you might be interested in flagging on for the purpose of your particular exam in the context of your particular program. A few typical flags that we use a lot would be spending less than 5 seconds on 20% or more of the items. Again, indicative of some perhaps anomalous behavior. Scoring greater than 90% in less than 10 minutes. Highlighting if there were any data administration anomalies. Did a handful of your candidates receive 55 items when they were supposed to receive 60? Did they receive the 60 score items but for some reason weren't administered an additional 15 unscored? This anomalous records tab is where you would be able to go to figure out if there were any of those types of issues. It can also help provide you some evidence, again, if you're looking to build a case against a particular, not only candidate, but testing center. Alpine would, of course, recommend triangulating several factors of data if you're ever going to be in an enforcement moment, as well as consulting with a legal or a law team at your organization before going after individual candidates based on this type of information. So again, when it comes to interpreting the health check, certainly as exam sponsors and program managers, we have a lot of access and insight into the data. Perhaps you're working with a psychometric staff that would be able to provide you with some statistical insight into the data. But it is key, again, to get those subject matter experts involved in the interpretation of health checks. Again, they can help to provide feedback on those item-level results, the candidate comments, perhaps providing feedback for necessary changes or edits to items with option flags, correlational issues. If those are in any way beyond simple grammatical fixes, again, you would want to repilot those items as unscored before including them on the operational form. They can help you gauge relevancy of the content to the current domain. Again, if you're in a rapidly changing domain area, or if you're in an area that has technological updates routinely, they can help give you that gauge of the items themselves and how appropriate they are for where we are in the industry and what an appropriate exam should include to really make the claims about passing candidates that we're hoping the exam is really pointing towards. They can help assist with those final keep-delete decisions. They can help provide insight into form-level concerns as well. Are candidates deviating largely when it comes to time or performance expectations? Are pass rates really high or really low compared to what was expected? Perhaps a subject matter expert looking into who has been taking the exam would help shed some light on that for your program. So what are the next steps following the health check? One typical combination would be to run a health check and then do a forms reassembly. 5 main reasons that you would be interested in doing that following a health check. If there were any issues with the parallel nature of your forms, it would help balance content, item, form difficulty, variability, variance, and test time across forms to eliminate those fairness issues. You could equate to the existing cut score. No need to run an additional standard setting if your cut score is operating as you were hoping it to. You can just simply perform, in this case, this would be a pre-equating to really bring that cut score across. Perhaps you're interested in scaled scoring. You can scale the equated cut score to the reporting scale to increase interpretability across versions and exam forms. Helps you maximize content relevancy and item quality, perhaps by replacing older items with previously unscored items that you had collected some data on. Again, that's also a way to do content refreshes on the fly, so you don't actually have to pull an exam down, re-beta test it, and re-release it. You can also minimize item exposure, keeping your item overlap low, hopefully within that 10 to 30% target range, and retiring items that have known performance issues or known security issues. That forms reassembly, in fact, the health check forms reassembly plan should be part of a larger exam refresh plan that gets written into your exam maintenance policy, with the goal of keeping exam content and blueprints up to date and aligned with the exam purpose. Again, hoping that the exam programs can remain flexible to domain and content shifts while still maintaining practical, psychometric, and statistical integrity of the exam and your exam program overall. With the keynote, the extent of changes, perhaps to your content, to your exam, to your blueprint, will drive the necessary exam maintenance activities. If there's any changes to the purpose of the exam, changes in the definition inherently of the domain of interest, shifts in the definition or the expectations of the MQC, it might be a moment where our exam maintenance needs to go back up, perhaps even all the way to the test design stage. Certainly in that case, it might be to the job task analysis or blueprint survey stage. If the changes are more minor, if they're more specific to certain sections, you may be able to do just specific maintenance around those sections. And if it's just kind of keeping up with routine exposure issues and item quality issues, perhaps it's just a continual item writing and reseeding of unscored items over time, where you're just running these health checks really to just keep that fingerprint, thumbprint on the pulse of the exam and making sure that everything's there. Always need to consider the necessary schedule, scope, budget, level of effort, available resources. Health checks can be a really great quick check into things. Exam refresh plans can oftentimes become overwhelming. So there may be some constraints that affect capacity and frequency of exam maintenance activities, but it is always important that this is kind of the end of the cycle, but a critical piece to ensure the valid use of your exam scores over time. A couple of references here that you guys can dive into again on a summer afternoon if you're looking for something to do. And that wraps up the presentation. So I think we have a couple minutes left for questions. Yes, Jana, if we had any come in?
We don't have any right now. I just wanted to go ahead and open the floor up. If there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand. You could ask them verbally, or if you'd prefer to just chat them in the question box, I'm happy to ask them of Lisa on your behalf. So we'll just take a moment here and see if there's any questions. Well, quiet group today, Lisa. I think, oh, there we go. Yes, to answer your question, John, the slides will be available. And we do have an attendee, Lisa, who's asking to see the reference slide again.
I've called it up. Pretty standard, pretty basic in terms of just the background of the types of statistics. There's nothing that's specific to Alpine health checks, anything like that in particular. There are plenty of marketing materials available that Jana could provide you with if you're interested in perhaps utilizing the service and you haven't before. But these are more generalized references that are just good kind of bookshelf items for people to have.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. And it looks, oh, we have one question before I outro us. Linda's asking, what are your thoughts around compromised items and writing clones?
Sorry, compromised items and what was the last piece?
Writing
clones?
Clones.
Okay. In statistical analyses that we've run here at Alpine, we've tended to find that the performance, the item level performance of cloned items or variant items, if you want to think of them that way, tends not to be as high as the base item. So it would be, in a lot of cases, although more kind of time intensive upfront to generate new items based on that, we tend to see that the life of independently developed items tends to be longer as the statistical performance tends to be higher. On a lot of health checks that we run for a lot of organizations that have kind of taken that approach, clones may not make it through initial seeding and first health check. So kind of from Alpine stance, from what we've seen, if you're putting the effort into item writing, you know, pull together a small panel and try to get some original items drafted, see those as unscored. Once you get those 50 hits on those items, pull them down. In terms of the value returned, you're probably better off going down that path just based on what we've seen across a host of professional credentialing and IT organizations that are attempting to use cloning as kind of a quick means to bolstering their item pool.
Thank you, Lisa, for answering that question. And it looks like the question box has slowed down, so I just wanted to take a moment as we leave today on behalf of Alpine Testing Solutions and Dr. O'Leary, our presenter. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to follow up shortly with the download link to the full slide presentation and recording from today, so you won't miss anything. And if you haven't already, please find Alpine in your social spaces. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and we'd love to engage with you there. If you have any feedback or suggestions about our webinars, please do email marketing@alpinetesting.com. And again, from all of us at Alpine, thank you so much for your support, and we hope you have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.